You are listening to Six Finger Learning with Jason Free.
Hey kids, it's Jason Free again, and you're back at Six Finger Learning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's fantastic to have you here. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my biggest pet peeves of higher education. It's just so fucking dull. It's so boring. I mean, really, how is it any different from high school? For a lot of college students, the chief difference is that you don't live at home anymore. But as soon as you get into a classroom, it's just like your old high school. You're sitting in a desk, you're listening to somebody drone on and on and on, and they just hand out assignments, and you're supposed to just regurgitate information. And that is education. That's the factory. And that's just bullshit. But it's not all the fault of the administration or the instructors of these different universities. And I'll get to that in a minute. But what is their fault is that they, of all people, should understand that by the time you become a college-age student, your brain is just about fully formed, which makes it more difficult for you to really learn something. I mean, there's 6-year-olds out there that can barely pay attention to things and still learn 3 or 4 different languages because of just the nature of their brain development. They still have all kinds of connections forming at a rapid rate. But when you're 19, 20, 21 and older, that shit's done. You have to have real focus, real concentration, and real alertness in order to really learn something. And they don't help. They don't really grab you. They don't really show you something that's interesting enough to keep you alert. They just keep hashing out the same old things again and again and again. Maybe it's more complicated, maybe it's more sophisticated, but the conveyance of the information is essentially the same. So what does that mean for you as a student? What that means is that you've got to step up your game. You've got to stop being so damn lazy. You've got to understand, just because the schools aren't changing, just because the instructors aren't changing, doesn't mean that you shouldn't change as well. Because you have to. Because you're not going to be in school for much longer. And if you do in school what you did for, K through 12, through college, and you go into the quote-unquote real world, you're fucked. At best, you're going to be a drone. You're not going to have any real mobility at all. Because the real world requires a lot more initiative. A much broader approach to things. A deeper sense of curiosity and initiative. If you want to stand out. So, how do you do this? You're not in control, right? You're paying money. You're sitting in a desk. You're following a schedule that's been assigned to you. You have a teacher that's been assigned to you. They're giving you assignments. What are you supposed to do? Well, there are countless things that you can do. And today we're going to focus on one of them. And it's going to be looking at one of the most ubiquitous and most time-consuming assignments that are given to college students. That's essays and research papers. Essays and research papers are pretty much the cornerstone of a great many disciplines at the college level. English, psychology, history, business, education, blah, 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 on and on and on. It's just papers, 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 papers. Now, before we get into how you can turn this assignment into something that actually matters, let's talk about how you have been taught this assignment in a way that has sort of beaten you down in terms of any kind of initiative, any kind of intellectual curiosity. First of all, you were probably taught one of two ways to write essays at the high school level. One way was probably very rigid. You probably had handouts showing you how to write an introductory paragraph, how you have to start off generally or with a hook. Jesus Christ almighty, am I sick of hooks. Sorry. It's just so stupid to teach somebody a hook. Grab my attention.
You assigned me the paper. Why do I have to entertain you? Why can't I just do something competently?
How do you have your thesis statement? Where is your thesis statement? All of these different things about introductory paragraphs. Now, introductory paragraphs are very important for the student because studies show that teachers, after they read an introductory paragraph, pretty much have an idea of the letter grade that they're going to assign the student. Students don't really realize that, but that's how teachers think. And the rest of your paper, unless it's a complete train wreck or unless it's just publishable level content, you're pretty much fighting for the plus or the minus of that grade level. And then you have the body paragraphs broken down and how they're supposed to look with your topic sentences and your setup and your quotes and your analysis or whatever. And it's very, very rigid. It's very cookie cutter. You're supposed to put your ideas into these very tight, constrained boxes. So there's not a lot of thought. It's more about gymnastics. It's really more about homogenizing your ideas into these structures. The second camp of essay teaching at the high school level is pretty much the 180-degree opposite. Anything goes. Just write it down. Essentially, just vomit out all the things that you can think of. The way that I can best describe this for people is how a lot of students, how they approach in-class essays. They have a question, they sit down, and they're just puking up everything they can think of. And there's no structure at all, or very little structure at all. And you're writing, and you're thinking about the time, and you're like, oh yeah, shit, I forgot to mention this, so I put that there. And then I write this down, and I write that down, and there's not a lot of structure, and it's a fucking mess. And it's very difficult for the teacher to really ascertain what your real thoughts are, what the structure that you're trying to convey your thoughts within. Because structure is important. Order is important in essay writing. Order is sequence, the arrangement of your ideas, and control of your ideas. I'm not teaching you composition today. You're welcome. I'm just saying that when you come to the college level, you really haven't gotten a lot of really good input as to how to write. And as a freshman writer, you are, let's just face it, as a freshman in general, your instructor's chief job is to homogenize you, is to get you on the same level with everybody else, to get you to write the whatever university way, the University of X way, the educational factory X way. Everybody has a certain sort of format, a certain sort of style, sort of approach to writing, and they want to make sure at the freshman level that you understand their way. And if you can't become homogenized, well, then you're going to leave. You're not going to make it. It has very little to do with thought. It has very little to do with developing you and your ideas and your strengths and addressing your weaknesses. It's bullshit. So that's what they do to fuck things up with this essay that it's their go-to. When in doubt, assign an essay. When in doubt, have an in-class essay. So what do the students do that's wrong? Well, first of all, they buy into this shit. It's very much a situation where obedience overrides everything else. And I can already hear people saying, well, what am I supposed to do? They're in control of my grade. And I'm like, well, what you're supposed to do is demand more. And if you cannot or will not demand more of your instructor and of your institution, then you have to demand more of yourself. Well, how do I demand more of myself? Do I start writing the paper earlier? Do I make them longer? What do I do? Well, I'll tell you what you shouldn't do before I tell you one way of approaching this in a better fashion. You shouldn't just go to Google for your research. So let's just break down the process real quick. You're assigned a paper. What do? Generally speaking, you either get started on it or you wait until the last minute. I was a wait to the last minute person. But regardless, because you're a college student, especially at the freshman and sophomore level, you have to conduct research. Why is that? Because your ideas don't mean shit. You haven't published anything. You haven't created anything. So you have to go out and get the ideas of others and incorporate them within yours. They boost up, they support your thoughts. And that's a valuable skill. That's something that when you leave the academic arena, you'll have to do, and you'll have to do well. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it's often the process of going about obtaining those outside authorities that you as a student are often incredibly lazy. You either use things from your textbook, you Google, maybe you go to a library. Maybe. But even if you go to a library, maybe you have a crap library. Which again is why you go to Google. And when you go to Google, you basically look at the first couple of pages, if that, of the research results, and you try to find ideas that you can try to incorporate into your paper. And again, it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. It's an incredibly limited exercise. Because when you do that, even if you do a good job, even if you find some good content, and even if you incorporate it well and you write it well and you hand it in to your teacher, what happens after that? You get a grade? Maybe some of you save your papers so that when you get future assignments, you might be able to pull some things out, make it a little bit easier for you for your other papers because you've already done the work to some degree. I think that's kind of rare, but there are people who do that. Well, I'm going to tell you a much better way. And it's going to demand more of yourself, but it's going to be wildly beneficial. But before I get to that, let me tell you a little story about me. I know, I'm an egomaniac, I'm sorry. I had a professor at the undergraduate level. We'll call him Professor Assface, because he was an assface. He was a major jerk when it came to essays and research papers. He wasn't one of those people who had these just stupid requirements of, because back in the day, I'm showing my age, back in the day you'd have these requirements because there was no internet. There was barely the internet, and it was nothing like it was today. But it was, you'd have these papers to write, and you'd have to have included within your paper a minimum of like 5 books, 5 journal articles, 3 instances of microfiche, whatever else. It's just like this taxonomy of different sources that you were supposed to gather. And it didn't really do anything other than try to get you to research, try to force you in order to go find information. I mean, what if I found some just fantastic information in 3 books? And that's all I needed because I have great thought and I have a good way of intertwining those pieces of information with those 3 books. Tough shit. You're going to fail because you need to go get all the other things too. It was just like a fucking scavenger hunt. And again, it had very little to developing me as an individual. He wasn't that bad, but he would rip the quality of your research to pieces at just a complete asinine level. That person's not smart enough. That book that you cited is crap. That journal that you used, it's crap. You got to find something better. He was very lofty. And I can make the argument that that's not a terrible thing, but the way that he wielded that very vague, subjective approach to evaluating research, he was an ass face. So this was at UAB, and it changed my life, this instance that I'm telling you. It really did. So I go over to Mervyn Stern Library, a fantastic library, a library that really flipped a switch for me. Because, believe it or not, when I left high school and I entered college, I was a fucking mess. I was not intellectually curious. I had no initiative. I mean, in terms of academics, I had no initiative. Getting loaded and just acting like an ass, I was all about it. I was your guy. So, anyway, I digress. I apologize. I go over to Mervyn Stern Library. They had fabulous librarians. And they were incredibly helpful if you came to them with more than just, hey, I have this assignment, can you help me? No, we're not here to do your work for you. If you say, hey, I've done some research, I'm having some problems finding these pieces that are really important, or can you help me find some other people who think along these lines or who are in this field, they would help you out. Well, the problem with a lot of research papers back in the day, these sorts of assignments were based upon scarcity. In other words, you'd sit in a class with 30 people and you'd all get assigned the same assignment. You'd all get assigned the same essay topic. And as I mentioned before, you'd often have the same research requirements of 5 of this and 4 of that and 2 of this and blah, blah, blah. So you had to get over to the fucking library in a hurry. If you didn't, those books would be gone, literally. And you would have no other alternative other than maybe go find another library. Because you would look it up, say, here's the perfect book. Nope, somebody already checked it out, and they're not going to have it back until after the essay's done. It's like, shit, what am I supposed to do? I mean, you had to hustle to get to the library to get your things. And there were some instances where the books, where you'd be lucky, where the really good books were restricted and you couldn't check them out. Well, you better bring a whole hell of a lot of dimes, nickels, and quarters because you're going to be doing a lot of Xeroxing. You'd have to get the books. You couldn't take them anywhere. And you'd have to Xerox the pages on a copy machine, pumping in money and Xeroxing those pages. So you'd have your content. Anyway, did any of the things I just described make you think, oh, wow, you can actually learn something from this stuff? You can develop. You can grow. No. It was just a big fucking waste of time and a big hassle. And most certainly, it didn't do anything to make our papers any stronger. So I go over to Mervyn Stern Library and I run into that problem. I need some books that aren't there anymore. And one book in particular I needed. I went to the librarian and said, hey, do you know when this book is going to be due? And they said, yes, it's due on this date. And it was due like 4 days after the due date for the essay. So I figured I'm screwed. But the librarian was nice enough to say, well, the author works here. Here being UAB. I was like, awesome. You know, do you think he'd let me have a copy? And she said, no, wait a minute. Don't think of it that way. Why don't you go interview him? I was like, you think he'd let me do that? She goes, absolutely. So she gave me the extension. His name was Jim Rachels. He passed away many years ago. Fabulous human being, wonderful author, probably the brightest instructor I ever had, if not the brightest, one of the top 3 or 4, without a doubt. So I pick up the campus phone on the librarian's desk, hit the extension, and I say, Dr. Rachels, I'm a student. I have an assignment with Professor Assface. I would really like to be able to use the content from your book, but it's not here. He said, come on over. I said, right now? He said, absolutely. Come on over right now. So I go over to his office. It's across the street. All of this was just like across the street from each other. It's a very small campus. Super nice guy. Sits me down, wants to get to know me a little bit, wants to know what I need to know for the assignment. And he says, do you have a tape recorder? And I said, well, yeah, I do. I had a boombox tape recorder. Again, that's how old I am. He said, why don't you come back here tomorrow with your tape recorder and we'll have this interview and you can record it. And I was like, this is amazing. He said, but I want you to come with really good questions. I want you to really think about this. I said, yes, sir. Absolutely. So I go home to my apartment and I'm like nervous. I'm like, oh shit, I got to take this seriously. This is a PhD who is in the philosophy department. He's very well regarded, multiple books published. And he and I are going to have a conversation for about an hour, and he wants to make sure that I have good questions. So I really dug into my essay topic. I really dug into the different angles that could be analyzed. Picked up my boombox in the morning, went over to see Dr. Rachel, sat down, and we had a fabulous conversation. But most importantly, I got gold. I got things that didn't appear in the printed book that everybody else in my class wanted to get their hands on, and some lucky person got their hands on. I got even better content. But most importantly, I developed a relationship with Dr. Rachels. He asked questions about me and my goals and what I'd like to do with my life. He was asking me about how I got to where I was. How did I become a student at UAB? And at the end of the conversation, he said, those were really good questions. I could tell that you were thinking. If I can help you with other papers, just let me know. Holy shit. That is awesome. So I went home, I started work on my paper, and I started putting together material from the interviews. And as I said, I just couldn't believe how great the information was and how it caused me to really want to put together a very good paper. And how I could more easily do that because I was much more involved in the research process. I wasn't looking for keywords in text and say, yeah, that's kind of what I want to talk about. Let me pull that out. Let me highlight that. I'll figure out a way to use that. Let me do this. Oh, yeah, that's what they're kind of talking about. I actually had a conversation about this with an expert. Well, I started putting together a rough draft because, yes, Professor Assface required a rough draft to be turned in, which, again, is one of those things that instructors do at every level. And it's mostly as a way to make sure or to better ensure that students don't wait till the last minute to turn in their paper, because teachers hate reading those things. They hate reading papers that were just thrown together. A lot of teachers don't like failing students also. I mean, first of all, it's just the task of, I've got to read this train wreck. And then also, they don't like failing people. There's some teachers who do, but a lot of teachers don't. So I hand in a rough draft, let's just say Monday. And I came back Wednesday, and at the end of class on Wednesday, he said, Jason, I'd like to talk to you. And I said, sure. He goes, I'd like to talk to you about this rough draft that you did. I said, okay, what do you want to know? He goes, you spoke with Dr. Rachels? I said, yes, sir, I did. And he kind of squinted at me like he didn't believe me. He said, how'd that go about? And I described to him, I went over to the library. They didn't have the book that I wanted. He was the author. The librarian told me that he was over in his office and I should give him a call. And he goes, do you have the tape? I said, I sure do. He said, bring in the tape next week. So I'm kind of like, why? Like he came across as he didn't trust me, and I just didn't like that, but whatever. I came in the next week. I handed him the tape. He said, can I borrow this? And I was like, well, that's all I have. He goes, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'll give it back to you. Okay. So the following Wednesday, he comes back and he gives me this tape and he goes, that was an outstanding interview. I'm going to start requiring students doing this. This is fantastic. And I said, thank you. I appreciate that. And he was still an ass face for other reasons in the class, how he dealt with female students and just whatever else. But I could see that a light bulb went off, that I was being very, very teacher pleasing by taking this next step, by actually contacting a source and becoming involved with that source and having information that nobody else had. And I started doing that as much as I possibly could. From that assignment forward, I started interviewing people as often as I possibly could. I used the library not for the books, not for the microfilm and all that, unless, of course, I had some, Nazi teacher who said, hey, you have to use these things and blah, blah, blah. I went to the library to get their phone books. Yes, again, that's how old I am. They had actual phone books where you would look up people and find out their phone number and you'd contact them and set up an interview. Now, in today's world, that's ridiculously simple because you have the internet, which is just one big fucking phone book for the whole planet. But my point is that I started using my essays and my research papers as a means of not just getting a grade for an assignment, but also to start touching various fields in a much more intimate fashion, in a much more personal fashion. I was networking. I was getting information that nobody else could get, and I was developing a library of material that nobody else could have. So that first interview that I had with Dr. Rachels, I had material from that one interview that I used for multiple years after that. And the other thing that happened is that I wouldn't just contact professors. I'd contact lawyers. I'd contact doctors. I'd contact teachers. I'd contact business people. I'd contact students. I'd contact all kinds of people. And I started developing this much broader perspective than I ever could by going to the library or by just listening to my instructor. And let's not forget the whole point of all of this. And by all this, I mean our educational factory and the processes they're putting us through, and how we're investing into these processes. Well, you're putting money into this, and you're either going the traditional route where all you're yielding is essentially a grade, a little bit of new knowledge, a little bit of new demonstration of how you can apply that new knowledge. But is it anything compared to what you'd be getting if you started interviewing people, started networking, started developing your own content? Think of the dollar signs. Remember, economic engine, capitalism. Think about it from that perspective. If it doesn't make sense on a common sense perspective, then just think about it in terms of numbers. Interviews are worth money. Content is worth money. Connections, they're worth money. And if you're just dumping your money into a black hole where you're not getting any direct investment back, you're on the path to becoming a drone, because you can't get out of that track. You need to look at things as, how many different people can I meet and how much money can they help bring to my table? Can they help me ultimately find a job? Can they ultimately give me content that I can save time on, because now I can work more instead of going to the library doing a bunch of bullshit research on Google? Whatever. That content's worth money. The more people you have on board, the more money they're kicking in ultimately. And just go after the people that you want to become and make the most of what's going to be your real life dealing with these people. Again, just think about it. You're going to school, you're going through the factory, you're going through the process, but it's the last factory. More than likely, unless you're going to graduate school, and again, that'll fly by. So you need to start getting into the real world. Do it now. Get a return on your investment. Make your life easier. Demand more. And I'm telling you, just like I would tell my students, stay the fuck away from Google unless you're looking up a way to contact somebody for an interview. Google is just a fucking waste of time. Because if you take that approach into the quote-unquote real world, once you leave your academic factory and you go to a job and your boss asks you to do something and you just go Google it, you're fucked. Google is just a dressed-up version of like Wikipedia. And again, I'm not really trying to shit on these like the way that I'm probably coming across. I'm just saying it's not the be-all, end-all source. It is the very first step that you should take. Because if you Google something, you're not developing your own information. You're probably going to get the same information that everybody in your class is using. So right there, you're not differentiating yourself from the rest of your class, which is what you're trying to do. I know that the school is trying to homogenize you, but you need to resist against that. And you need to make sure that you have your own take on things. Not only that, you're not developing relationships. And I'm telling you, when I interviewed people, I often interviewed people more than once. And that's because they would, I would say 8 times out of 10. 2 times out of 10, I'd interview somebody and I wouldn't touch them again, either because they weren't very good in terms of giving me information, or they just didn't want to give me the time. Their time, their valuable time. Understandable, no big deal. But at least 8 out of 10 people, they wanted to talk to me. They wanted to share. They were partially flattered. They were partially like curious as to what is being taught. Like, okay, I'm a teacher. That's what I was going to school for. I'm a teacher. What are they teaching you? Wow, that's a waste of time. Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that. It became a conversation less than an interview. And they would want to know, how did I do on the paper? Because they owned part of that grade in their minds. And so I was networking. I was also learning things outside of the scope of the assignment. I would find out that, oh, wow, this element of teaching really sucks, or this element of teaching is really amazing. And that had nothing to do with the assignment. We were just having a conversation. And so I developed a richer understanding than I did sitting in class, reading books, or going to the library. I was actually developing. I was actually learning. My essays and research projects became the most important part of my development as a person and as a professional. On top of that, I would get inside information. Oh, you don't want to teach here. Oh, you definitely want to teach there. Awesome. That's not taught in class. And if I heard it from enough people, I knew that it was good information. Or if I didn't hear it enough from other people, I would know it's bad information. I also could go to people after the fact and get letters of recommendation. I could go also to these people and get all kinds of suggestions or introductions to other people to interview. It was just this big snowball of learning, of growing, of developing that never could occur by using Google, by listening to my instructor, by going across the street and getting some journals and just getting my grade. This is not a unique approach. A lot of people have done this. It's pretty well known that Judd Apatow, the popular and successful comedy writer, producer, I think he starred in some things, so actor. When he was in high school, I think it was for his high school radio station, not his high school newspaper, he would interview comedians that he liked. And I think it was more of an excuse. I don't think he was really trying to get these people to appear on the radio station, the school radio station. I think he was using the radio station just as a means of getting an introduction. And it helped him immensely. One of the people that he interviewed was Gary Shandling. And I believe, I might be wrong about this, that Gary Shandling, through that relationship, eventually gave Judd Apatow a job to write jokes for him. And he went on to make some of the most popular movies of the last decade or so, that being Judd Apatow. And he interviewed everybody. Seinfeld. I'm not going to name all of them. There's a bunch of different people that he interviewed. So you have the opportunity every single time when you're given an essay assignment to actually do something that's going to help you as opposed to just a grade, and to do something that should thrill you. It's something that you should be like, fuck yeah, I want to go talk to these people about this thing, about this question. Because this is a question that is important to the field that I want to go into. And you should become more professional and less academic in your approach. As a student, you're this receptacle where things are just being dumped inside of you. You're just being dumped with information. So stop being a receptacle and start being a professional. That's the whole point that you're in school, right? To become a professional, right? And if you take this approach of interviewing, I promise you, you're going to take that activity very seriously. Just like Dr. Rachel said, you're going to have to come up with good questions. Before that, you're going to have to identify the right people to approach. That is an important skill. Then you're going to have to figure out how to contact them. I did it by phone because there wasn't a lot of email addresses back then. You may do it by phone. You may do it by email. You're going to have to put together a good pitch. Again, a very valuable skill. Hi, I'm Jason. I'm a student at X. I have a paper on B. Can I have 10 minutes of your time? I would love to, record you since you're a person within the field. I think it would help with my research and you could provide an interesting insight, blah, 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 blah. You're going to have to learn how to probably give them the questions ahead of time so that they feel like, okay, I understand what they want. This will only take like 15 minutes, blah, blah, blah. All of those things are skills that you should learn. But you don't learn if you're just this receptacle. I'm being handed a research paper. I'm going to go to Google. I'm going to go get some books. I'm going to write a paper. I'm going to hand it in. I'm going to get a grade. I'm done. Demand more. Demand more of yourself. Demand more of that opportunity. That opportunity to reach out into the field, get out of the academic world and into the professional world and start acting like a professional. Start asking questions. Start learning how to interact with who will become your colleagues and professional peers. Because you're going to get out of school. One way or the other. You're going to get out of it, and that's the world that you're going to be entering into. And this is a perfect transitional opportunity for you to do so. And lastly, you're developing content that nobody else has. You're developing your own library. We will be sharing countless bits and pieces of information that nobody else on the planet has, simply because we went through this exercise. Not that we were getting essay assignments, but we were going through the same process of reaching out to people, reaching out to experts, establishing those relationships, developing that rapport, having that opportunity to network. Oh, you know who you should else talk to, Jason? You should talk to this person over here. I'll introduce you. If you don't do those things, you're shortchanging yourself. If you don't do those things, you're a part of the problem. And you can sit back and bitch about how much of a waste of time school is and how much of a waste of money school is. But you are part of the problem. You need to squeeze every drop out of every opportunity that you can. And with just essays and research projects alone, you could have an exponentially greater benefit, both as a student, because teachers eat this shit up. If they see that you're going out and do these things, if they see that you're recording this stuff and you're inserting it in your papers and you're networking, you're going to get their tails wagging in a major fashion. Professionally, you're getting exposure to the real world. You're dipping your feet in the real world. But most importantly, personally, you're breaking out of the fucking processed mindset of K through 12 in college where you're a drone and you're a receptacle. Unless you want to be a drone and a receptacle who basically transitions from a desk to a cubicle, that's what you want with your life? Okay. But if you want to do something more, you shouldn't wait until after you graduate from college because it might be a little too late. Anyway, this is just one instance, essays, that you can demand more of yourself and actually grow. We will be sharing more of these sorts of opportunities in follow-up podcasts. But I hope this helped you. I hope this motivates you to go out and use Google for developing contacts and reaching out to people. But don't waste your time anymore. You deserve more. But you're going to have to demand more. Thanks again for coming. I'm Jason Free. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Your system and other messages and ancillary